All right, everything is well. You should not be bothered about anything. That's just a part of life.
The shy girl's secret shocked the billionaire doctor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the sterile examination room, casting harsh shadows across the pale walls. Dr. Kelvin Matthews stood frozen, his breath caught somewhere between his lungs and throat, staring at something that shouldn't exist, something impossible. His hands, usually steady as steel during the most complex procedures, trembled as they held the medical chart. The clipboard clattered against the metal tray beside him. Before we begin, please subscribe, it's free, and it makes my day 100% better. Also like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're watching from on comment section. I pray may the good God Almighty bless and preserve you all and your family. Amen. Let's begin. Clarissa Chen sat on the examination table, her face flushed crimson, blonde waves cascading over her shoulders as she clutched the thin hospital gown around herself. Her green eyes shimmered with unshed tears of humiliation and fear. She had never imagined that a routine medical examination would unravel the carefully constructed life she'd built over the past 5 years. I can explain, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the mechanical whir of medical equipment. But Kelvin couldn't speak. His dark eyes that had seen countless patients, witnessed every conceivable medical condition, gazed upon human bodies in their most vulnerable states, were fixed on the intricate pattern of scars that decorated her lower abdomen. Not surgical scars. Not accident scars. These were deliberate, artistic, impossibly precise markings that told a story he'd spent 7 years trying to forget. Because Kelvin Matthews recognized those scars. He had put them there himself. 6 hours earlier, Kelvin had walked through the marble corridors of Matthews Memorial Hospital with the confidence of a man who owned not just the building, but half the city's medical infrastructure. At 34, Dr. Kelvin Matthews was a paradox that defied conventional categorization, a board-certified cardiologist who'd revolutionized minimally invasive heart surgery, a business magnate whose pharmaceutical companies generated billions annually, and a philanthropist whose foundations funded medical research across 3 continents. His Armani suit, tailored to perfection, moved with him like a second skin as he strode past nurses and residents who stepped aside deferentially. But beneath the expensive fabric and commanding presence, Kelvin carried a weight that no amount of wealth could lift, a past that haunted him like a ghost he couldn't exorcise. Dr. Matthews, his secretary, Margaret, called out as he approached his private office suite on the hospital's top floor. Your 9 o'clock appointment cancelled, but there's been a last-minute addition to your schedule. A young woman, early 20s, needs a pre-employment physical examination for the nursing program. Dr. Chen was supposed to handle it, but she called in sick. Kelvin barely glanced up from his phone, scrolling through emails about a merger that would add another hospital chain to his portfolio. Send her to Anderson or Roberts. I have the board meeting at 11. Both are fully booked, Margaret replied, her tone apologetic but firm. And the patient specifically requested discretion. She's apparently quite anxious about medical examinations. I thought your reputation for patient comfort might help. Something in Margaret's description made Kelvin pause. He'd built his medical practice on the principle that every patient, regardless of their anxiety or fear, deserved compassionate care. It was a philosophy born from his own traumatic past, a past he'd never shared with anyone. Fine, he sighed, setting down his phone. Schedule her for 10. But make it quick. What Kelvin didn't know was that the universe had been conspiring to bring him face to face with his past for years. Hand, already mentally running through the standard pre-employment physical checklist. He looked up from the paperwork and time itself seemed to fracture. The young woman sitting on the examination table was achingly beautiful in a way that bypassed conscious thought and struck something primal in his chest. Blonde hair, unusual for someone with the surname Chen, cascaded in natural waves past her shoulders. Green eyes, wide with anxiety, met his for a fraction of a second before she looked away, her pale skin flushing pink. But it wasn't her beauty that made Kelvin's world stop spinning. It was the way she held herself, shoulders slightly hunched, making herself smaller, one hand unconsciously protecting her abdomen. It was the scar that peeked out from beneath her hairline near her right temple, partially hidden by carefully styled waves. It was the way her left hand trembled, just barely, in a pattern he recognized from his own nightmares. "Ms. Chen," he said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. He cleared his throat, forcing professionalism back into place like armor.
"I'm Dr. Matthews."
"I understand you're here for a pre-employment physical." Clarissa nodded, still not meeting his eyes. "Yes, sir. For the nursing program." Her voice. Kelvin's grip tightened on the clipboard. Soft, almost melodic, with the faintest hint of something else underneath. An accent scrubbed away, perhaps, or vocal cords that remembered screaming. "This is a standard examination," Kelvin explained, moving to the computer terminal to pull up the requirements. "We'll check vital signs, perform a general physical assessment, and review your medical history. Everything discussed in this room is completely confidential." He kept his tone neutral, professional, but his mind was racing. There was something familiar about this woman, something that pulled at memories he'd spent years trying to bury. But that was impossible. He'd left that world behind 7 years ago, burned every bridge, eliminated every connection to the person he used to be. As Kelvin ran through the preliminary checks, blood pressure, elevated, likely from anxiety, pulse, rapid, temperature, normal, he maintained careful distance, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd examined thousands of patients. But he noticed things he shouldn't have noticed. The way she flinched when his stethoscope touched her back, even through the gown. The pattern of old scars on her forearms, faded but visible in the harsh fluorescent light. The defensive posture of someone who'd learned to protect vital organs. "Ms. Chen, I need to ask some questions about your medical history," Kelvin said, sitting on the rolling stool to appear less intimidating. "Any previous surgeries?"
"No."
The word came out too quickly. "Serious illnesses or hospitalizations?"
"No."
"Any history of trauma, accidents, injuries, anything requiring emergency medical attention?" A pause. Too long.
"No."
Kelvin made notes, but his internal alarm systems were firing on all cylinders. She was lying. He could see it in the tension of her jaw, the way her pupils dilated slightly, the unconscious protective gesture of her hand moving to her abdomen. "I need to perform a physical examination now," Kelvin said gently. "I'll need you to lie back and untie the gown. I'll examine your abdomen, chest, and pelvic area. I can have a female nurse present if that would make you more comfortable."
"No."
Clarissa's response was sharp, panicked. She immediately tried to moderate her tone. "I mean, no, that's okay. I'd prefer fewer people." Kelvin nodded, understanding but wary. As Clarissa lay back on the examination table, her hands clutching the edges of the gown, he could see her entire body trembling. This was more than standard medical anxiety. This was fear bordering on trauma response. "I'm going to start with your chest," Kelvin explained, warming the stethoscope. "Listen to your heart and lungs. Just breathe normally." He worked methodically, professionally, but his mind was cataloging details that didn't fit. The raised scar tissue along her ribcage that suggested poorly healed fractures. The faded burn marks on her shoulder that formed a pattern he'd seen once before in a file he shouldn't have had access to. The way her breathing pattern changed, not from anxiety, but from practiced control, like someone trained to manage pain. "Now I need to examine your abdomen," Kelvin said, his hand hovering over the tie of her gown. "May I?" Clarissa's eyes squeezed shut, and she nodded, a single tear escaping down her temple into her hair. Kelvin gently pulled the gown aside, and the world stopped. The scars shouldn't exist. They couldn't exist. Kelvin had overseen the destruction of every record, eliminated every trace, personally ensured that the project had been buried so deep that even whispers of its existence had been erased. Yet here, on the trembling abdomen of a young woman claiming to be nothing more than a nursing student, was the unmistakable mark of Project Chimera. The scar pattern was intricate, almost beautiful in its terrible precision, a network of lines radiating from a central point just below her navel, forming a pattern that resembled both a mandala and an anatomical diagram. Some artist had later tried to incorporate the scars into a tattoo design of cherry blossoms and vines, but Kelvin's trained eye could see the original markings beneath the ink. He knew those markings because he had designed them. 7 years ago, when Kelvin was a different person with a different name, he'd been the youngest researcher recruited into a Black Ops medical program that didn't officially exist. Project Chimera had been sold to him as cutting-edge trauma research, developing techniques to help soldiers recover from catastrophic injuries. But the truth had been far darker. They had been creating weapons. Human weapons. The scars on Clarissa's abdomen marked entry points for experimental implants, long since removed but leaving their signature behind. Only 12 subjects had ever received those implants. Kelvin had personally supervised the procedures on 8 of them. All 12 had supposedly died when the facility burned down 7 years ago, a fire Kelvin himself had started before fleeing with the evidence that could take down everyone involved. Dr. Matthews. Clarissa's frightened voice pulled him back to the present. Is something wrong? Kelvin realized he'd been standing frozen, staring at her exposed abdomen for far too long. His mind raced through possibilities, each more impossible than the last. If she was from the project, she should be dead. If she wasn't, how did she get those specific scars? The pattern wasn't random. It was precise, purposeful, unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. Kelvin struggled for words, his usual composure shattered. Ms. Chen, I need you to tell me the truth. Where did you get these scars? Clarissa's eyes flew open, panic flooding her features. She tried to sit up, to pull the gown closed, but Kelvin's hand shot out instinctively, gently but firmly preventing her from covering the marks. Please, she whispered, tears streaming freely now. Please don't ask me that. I just need to pass this examination.
I promise I'm healthy.
I can work. I can. Subject 7, Kelvin breathed, the designation falling from his lips before he could stop it. You're Subject 7. The color drained from Clarissa's face. For a moment, she looked like she might faint. Then something shifted in her expression. The shy, anxious girl disappeared, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. That name doesn't exist anymore, she said, her voice steady despite the tears. She died 7 years ago. I'm just Clarissa Chen. Nobody special. Nobody worth remembering. But Kelvin was already pulling back, his mind reeling. Subject 7 had been special, extraordinarily special. A 17-year-old girl pulled from the foster system, one of 3 female subjects in the program. Her file had shown remarkable adaptation to the implants, accelerated healing, and psychological resilience that defied explanation. She had also been the subject Kelvin had tried to save the night he burned down the facility. He'd failed. Or so he'd thought. How are you alive? Kelvin demanded, his professional facade crumbling. The fire. Everyone died in the fire. I checked the body counts, the dental records, You didn't check as carefully as you thought, Clarissa interrupted, sitting up now and clutching the gown closed with white-knuckled hands. Or maybe you did, and someone wanted you to think we all died. The implications of her words hit Kelvin like a physical blow. If she had survived, others might have too. And if others had survived, the project might still be active. Everything he'd sacrificed, his career, his identity, 7 years of hiding behind wealth and philanthropy, might have been for nothing. Who else survived? Kelvin asked urgently, moving closer. Who else got out? Clarissa shook her head, fresh tears spilling. I can't tell you that. I can't tell you anything. I'm just a girl trying to pass a medical exam so I can go to nursing school. Please, Dr. Matthews, just sign the form. Let me disappear back into my normal life. But Kelvin knew there was no going back to normal, not for either of them. The moment he'd recognized those scars, the careful walls he'd built around his past had crumbled. He'd spent 7 years trying to atone for his participation in Project Chimera through charitable work and legitimate medical practice. He'd told himself he'd save lives by destroying the program, that the 12 deaths were a necessary sacrifice to prevent hundreds more. Now, looking at this young woman whose eyes held both terror and defiance, Kelvin realized he'd been lying to himself. "I can't just sign the form," he said quietly, pulling up a stool to sit so they were at eye level. "Those scars. Clarissa, if those implants are still inside you." "They're not," she said firmly. "I removed them myself. 3 years ago." Kelvin's eyes widened. "You removed them yourself? That's impossible. The integration process, the nerve connections, you would have bled out. No one could perform that procedure without a full surgical team." A bitter smile crossed Clarissa's face. "You trained us to be self-sufficient, Dr. Matthews. Or should I call you Dr. Jong? That was your name back then, wasn't it? Before you became a billionaire and bought yourself a new identity." The use of his old name felt like a slap. Kelvin Jong had been an idealistic researcher who believed he was serving his country. Kelvin Matthews was the man who tried to make amends by building an empire dedicated to legitimate medical advancement. "How long have you known who I am?" Kelvin asked. "I recognized you the moment you walked through that door," Clarissa admitted. "But I hoped you wouldn't recognize me. I've changed so much. The hair, the weight, She gestured vaguely at her face. "Minor cosmetic adjustments. Nothing major, but enough to look different from the terrified teenager in those files." Kelvin studied her face more carefully now, seeing past the beauty and anxiety to the bone structure beneath. Yes, he could see it now. The girl from the files, Subject 7, whose real name he'd never been allowed to know. She'd been thin then, malnourished, with dark hair cut short and defiant eyes that had refused to show fear even during the most painful procedures. "Why nursing school?" Kelvin asked. "With your capabilities, you could." "I want a normal life," Clarissa cut him off. "I want to help people without hurting anyone. I want to wake up without checking for threat vectors. I want to exist without looking over my shoulder. Is that so hard to understand?" It wasn't. Kelvin wanted the same things. That's why he'd built this hospital, why he funded medical research, why he tried so hard to bury the man he used to be. But looking at Clarissa, at the evidence of their shared past written on her skin, Kelvin knew that some things couldn't be buried. "I'll sign your form," Kelvin said finally. "You're clearly healthy enough for the nursing program. But Clarissa, if others survive the project, if anyone is still running experiments—" "I don't know anything about that," Clarissa said quickly, too quickly. "I've been on my own since I escaped. No contact with anyone from before." Another lie. Kelvin could see it in her eyes. But he also saw the desperation, the fear of losing the normal life she'd fought so hard to build. He understood that fear intimately. He signed the medical clearance form with a hand that wasn't quite steady, then handed it to her. "You're cleared for the nursing program. But Clarissa, if you ever need help, if anyone from the project contacts you, you can come to me. I have resources now. Protection." Clarissa took the form, clutching it like a lifeline. "Thank you, Dr. Matthews. I'll never forget this kindness." As she slipped behind the curtain to change back into her clothes, Kelvin sat alone with his thoughts, trying to process the impossible revelation. The past he'd tried to escape had literally walked into his examination room. The question was, what would he do about it? Kelvin couldn't focus on the board meeting. Around him, 15 executives presented quarterly reports, discussed expansion strategies, and debated the merits of acquiring a medical device manufacturer in Singapore. Their words washed over him like meaningless noise as his mind replayed every second of the examination room encounter. Subject 7 was alive. Clarissa Chen was alive. The implications cascaded through his thoughts like dominoes falling. If she had survived, others might have too. Which meant the project might not be as dead as he'd believed. Which meant the people he'd thought he'd defeated might still be active, still experimenting, still turning vulnerable people into weapons. Kelvin. His CFO, David Chen, no relation to Clarissa, despite the shared surname, waved a hand in front of his face. "Did you hear the question?" "I." Kelvin blinked, forcing himself back to the present.
I'm sorry, David.
"Could you repeat that?" Concerned glances exchanged around the polished conference table. Kelvin Matthews was known for his razor-sharp focus, his ability to track multiple complex issues simultaneously. Seeing him distracted was unprecedented. "Are you feeling all right?" his COO, Sarah Martinez, asked. "You look pale." "I'm fine," Kelvin lied, straightening in his chair. "Continue with the report." But he wasn't fine. As the meeting dragged on, Kelvin's mind kept drifting to Clarissa's face, the fear in her eyes when he'd recognized her, the quiet desperation when she'd asked him to just let her disappear. He'd given her what she wanted, signed the clearance form, sent her on her way. It had seemed like the right thing to do at the time. Now, he wasn't sure. The moment the meeting adjourned, Kelvin returned to his office and locked the door. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, his hands clenched behind his back, mind racing through possibilities. He needed information. Real information, not speculation. If Project Chimera wasn't as dead as he believed, he had to know. And there was only one person who might have answers. One person from his past he'd maintained the smallest thread of connection with, despite the risks. Kelvin pulled out a burner phone from a hidden compartment in his desk, one of 3 he kept for communications he couldn't risk being traced. He dialed a number he'd memorized but never written down, a number that changed every 6 months according to a pattern only 2 people in the world knew. It rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered. "I was wondering when you'd call." "Victoria," Kelvin said, his voice tight. "We need to talk." "About Subject 7. Victoria's tone was knowing, unsurprised. "I heard she walked into your hospital today. That must have been quite the shock." Kelvin's blood ran cold. "You've been watching her." "I've been watching all of them," Victoria replied. "The ones who survived." "Did you really think you destroyed everything that night, Kelvin? You were always too idealistic for this work." Victoria Chen, again, no relation to Clarissa, had been the project's senior intelligence officer, the person responsible for recruiting subjects and eliminating security threats. She'd also been the one who'd helped Kelvin gather evidence of the project's true nature, who'd looked the other way when he'd started the fire that was supposed to end everything. How many survived? Kelvin demanded. 5, including Subject 7. Though one died 2 years ago, unrelated to the project, just bad luck and worse choices. The other 4 scattered to the winds. Subject 7 was always the most determined to disappear. And you just let them go. A pause. "I made a choice that night, Kelvin. Same as you. I could have stopped you from burning the facility. I could have reported what you were doing. But I'd seen enough. Done enough. So I let you burn it down, and I let the survivors escape, and I've spent the last 7 years making sure no one else comes looking for them." Kelvin processed this information, his mind reeling. "Why didn't you tell me they survived?" "Because you needed to believe they were dead," Victoria said simply. "You needed to grieve, to feel the weight of what you'd done, to let it drive you to become someone better. If you'd known they survived, you would have tried to find them, protect them. You would have drawn attention to them when all they wanted was to disappear." She was right. Kelvin knew she was right, even though the knowledge hurt. If he'd known Subject 7, Clarissa, was alive, he would have moved heaven and earth to find her, to protect her, to make amends. And in doing so, he might have led their enemies right to her. "Is the project really dead?" Kelvin asked. "The facility is destroyed. The original leadership is scattered or in prison for unrelated crimes. The research is supposedly destroyed. But Kelvin, you know how these things work. The people behind the project, the ones with real power, they didn't go away just because one facility burned down. They've gone underground, but they're still out there. And they're still looking for their lost investments." "Clarissa removed her implants," Kelvin said. "She told me she did it herself 3 years ago." Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She told you that? And you believed her?" "You're saying she lied." "I'm saying those implants can't be removed without killing the host. The integration process you designed was too thorough. The neural connections, the circulatory system modifications, They're permanent. She might have removed some components, but the core implants? Still there. Still active. She's learned to suppress them, to live as normally as possible, but they're definitely still there. Kelvin's hands gripped the phone so tightly he heard the case creak. Then she's still at risk. If anyone from the project realizes she's alive. They already know, Victoria interrupted. Why do you think she came to your hospital? Why do you think she walked right into an examination with you, of all people? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Kelvin's mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. She's being followed, he said slowly. She came to me because she knew I'd recognize her. She wanted me to know she was alive. Maybe, Victoria said. Or maybe she came to you because she needs your help but is too proud or too scared to ask directly. Or maybe, and this is the possibility that worries me, she came to you as a test. A test. For whom? For the people who might still be running parts of the project. Think about it, Kelvin. You're the golden boy now, billionaire philanthropist, renowned surgeon, too public to touch directly. But if they wanted to know whether you'd stayed quiet about the project, whether you'd blow their cover if confronted with evidence, what better way to test than to see how you'd react to encountering a survivor? The implications made Kelvin's stomach turn. You think she's working with them? That she's some kind of bait? I think she's a scared young woman trying to survive in a world that wants to use her as a weapon, Victoria said. But I also think she's not telling you everything. None of the survivors are. They've all got secrets, Kelvin. Things they did to survive. Things they're still doing. Kelvin turned away from the window, pacing his office like a caged animal. I need to know the truth. I need to know what she's really doing here, what she wants, who might be coming after her. Then talk to her, Victoria said. Really talk to her. Not as Dr. Matthews the billionaire, and not as Dr. Jong the guilty researcher. Talk to her as someone who understands what she's been through because you were there. You helped create her, Kelvin. Maybe it's time you helped save her. The call ended, leaving Kelvin alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that his carefully constructed life was about to come crashing down around him. Clarissa's hand shook as she unlocked the door to her tiny studio apartment in one of the city's less fashionable neighborhoods. The medical clearance form crinkled in her pocket, representing everything she'd worked toward for 5 years. She should have been celebrating. Instead, she felt like she was going to vomit. The moment she'd seen Kelvin Matthews walk through that examination room door, Clarissa's carefully planned future had tilted into chaos. She'd known it was possible, had researched the hospital staff extensively before choosing it for her required physical, but she'd convinced herself that the chances of being assigned to him specifically were infinitesimally small. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. Clarissa dropped her purse on the second-hand couch and moved to the window, pulling back the thin curtain to check the street below. Same cars. Same pedestrians.
No había surveillance.
But that didn't mean anything. The people who trained her had taught her how to disappear, but they'd also taught her how to find someone who didn't want to be found. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Clarissa's blood went cold. She stared at the screen for 3 rings before answering. Hello. Subject 7. The voice was mechanically distorted, completely unrecognizable. It's been a long time. I don't go by that name anymore, Clarissa said, proud that her voice remained steady. You have the wrong number. We both know that's not true. We've been watching you, 7. Waiting to see if you'd stay buried or if you'd eventually resurface. Today's medical examination was illuminating. Fear spiked through Clarissa's chest, but she kept her voice calm. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a student. You're so much more than that, the voice continued. And you know it. The implants may be dormant, but they're not gone. You can still feel them, can't you? Especially when you're stressed. Especially when you're frightened. Like right now. Clarissa's free hand unconsciously moved to her abdomen, pressing against the scars hidden beneath her shirt. The voice was right. She could feel the implants, a faint humming sensation deep in her core that intensified with emotion. She'd learned to ignore it, to compartmentalize the feeling as just another quirk of her damaged body. "What do you want?" Clarissa asked. "Confirmation," the voice replied. "We needed to know if Dr. Matthews maintained his silence about the project. If he recognized you and reported it to authorities, it would have been problematic. But he didn't, did he? He just signed your form and let you walk away. Which means he's still keeping his secrets, still protecting himself." "So this was a test," Clarissa breathed. "You used me to test him." "We used each other. 7. You knew there was a chance he'd be there. You chose that hospital anyway. Why? Because you wanted to see him again? Because you thought he might help you? Or because you're still the loyal little soldier we trained you to be?" The accusation stung because it carried truth. Clarissa had chosen Matthews Memorial Hospital deliberately. She told herself it was because they offered the fastest processing for pre-employment physicals, but somewhere deeper, she'd wanted to see him. Wanted to know if the man who tried to save her 7 years ago would recognize what she'd become. "I'm not working for you," Clarissa said firmly. "I'm done with that life. I completed your test, unwittingly, but I completed it. Now leave me alone." "Oh, 7. You're never done with this life. The implants ensure that. But don't worry, we are not here to drag you back. Not yet, anyway. Consider this call a courtesy. A warning, if you will." "Warning about what?" "About the fact that you're not the only one who recognized Dr. Matthews today. There are others interested in the good doctor, others who don't share our restraint. They'll be coming for him soon. And when they do, they'll discover his connection to you. Which means they'll come for you too." The line went dead. Clarissa stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear, her mind racing. Everything was falling apart. She'd worked so hard to build this life, to become someone normal, to escape the nightmare of Project Chimera. And now, in one day, one chance encounter, it was all unraveling. She needed to run. Pack what she could carry, empty her minimal savings, and disappear into a new city with a new name. She'd done it before. She could do it again. But even as the thought formed, Clarissa knew she wouldn't do it. Because the voice on the phone had said they were coming for Kelvin. And despite everything, despite the pain he'd caused her during those experiments, despite the scars he'd left on her body and soul, Kelvin Matthews had tried to save her. He'd destroyed his career, abandoned his research, and spent 7 years building something good out of the ashes of what they'd done. She owed him a warning at least. Clarissa grabbed her laptop and began typing an encrypted message to an email address she'd memorized but never contacted. One of 3 emergency communication channels she'd established years ago and never used. "Dr. Matthews," she typed. "They know about us. They're coming for you. I'm sorry I brought this to your door. See." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then immediately began packing a go-bag. Whether Kelvin responded or not, whether he believed her or dismissed her as paranoid, Clarissa had to prepare for the worst. Because the voice on the phone had been right about one thing, she was never really done with this life. The implants, dormant but still present, ensured that. Project Chimera had created weapons, and weapons didn't get to retire. They just got redeployed. Kelvin received Clarissa's encrypted message at 9:47 p.m. while reviewing surgical notes in his penthouse apartment. The message itself wasn't particularly detailed, but the fact that she'd contacted him at all sent alarms ringing through his mind. He'd given her his emergency email address, had written it on the back of his business card while she was changing behind the curtain. At the time, it had been an impulsive gesture, a way to offer help while respecting her desire for distance. He hadn't actually expected her to use it. The fact that she had used it, within hours of their encounter, meant the situation was worse than he'd thought. Kelvin immediately called Victoria back on the secure line. "She contacted me," he said without preamble. "I know," Victoria replied. "I intercepted the message before it reached you. You're reading a decrypted version I forwarded. Her encryption was good, military grade, actually. Someone trained her well." You've been monitoring my communications. Of course I have. I've been monitoring all communications related to Project Chimera for 7 years. How do you think I've kept the survivors safe? Kelvin pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling a heat building behind his eyes. What does she mean they're coming for me? Who's coming? That's what I'm trying to figure out, Victoria said, and for the first time Kelvin heard genuine concern in her voice. I've been tracking chatter in the intelligence community, nothing concrete, but there's been unusual interest in medical research facilities with certain capabilities. Specifically, facilities working on biointegration technology and neural enhancement. Your hospital has been mentioned twice in the past month. My hospital doesn't do that kind of research, Kelvin protested. Everything we do is transparent, peer-reviewed, completely legitimate. Your hospital doesn't, Victoria agreed. But you do. Or you did. And there are people who remember what you were capable of 7 years ago. People who want those capabilities for themselves. Kelvin crossed to his apartment's floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the glittering cityscape. From up here, 40 stories above the streets, everything looked peaceful, orderly, safe. He knew better. I destroyed all the research, Kelvin said. Every file, every backup, every record of what we did. I made sure nothing survived. Did you? Victoria's question was pointed. Or did you make sure nothing you could find survived? Kelvin, you were brilliant, but you were also young and naive. The project had layers you never saw. Redundancies you never knew about. The research might have been archived in places you never had access to. The implications made Kelvin's blood run cold. If the research still existed, if someone had access to it, they could restart the program. Create new subjects. Perfect the techniques he'd abandoned. I need to see Clarissa again, Kelvin said. I need to know exactly what she knows, who contacted her, what they want. That might not be safe for either of you, Victoria warned. If someone is watching, if they're waiting to see if you two reconnect. I don't care about safe anymore, Kelvin interrupted. I spent 7 years hiding, building walls, pretending I could outrun my past. It didn't work. So now I'm going to face it head-on. Starting with Clarissa. Victoria was silent for a long moment. There's something else you should know about Subject 7. Something that wasn't in her official file. What? She wasn't recruited randomly from the foster system like the others. She was specifically selected. Targeted. Her biological parents weren't unknown casualties of addiction like the records claimed. They were researchers. Geneticists working on human enhancement projects before Project Chimera even existed. Kelvin felt the ground shift beneath his feet. What are you saying? I'm saying Subject 7, Clarissa, was designed before she was ever recruited. Her parents were running illegal experiments, using their own daughter as a test subject for genetic modifications. When the government discovered what they were doing, they eliminated the parents and absorbed the daughter into Project Chimera. She wasn't just another homeless kid with no one to miss her. She was the proof of concept. My God, Kelvin breathed. Does she know? I don't know what she knows or what she remembers. Her early childhood records were heavily redacted even in the classified files. But Kelvin, if her genetics were already modified before we implanted her, if her body was already primed for enhancement, that would explain why she adapted so well. Why she survived when others didn't. And why people might be very, very interested in finding her now. Kelvin's mind raced through the implications. If Clarissa wasn't just a survivor of Project Chimera but also a genetic experiment from before the project, she represented something unique, something that couldn't be replicated easily. She was proof that human enhancement was possible, that the theoretical research could produce practical results. I'm going to her apartment, Kelvin decided. Right now. Kelvin, wait. But he'd already hung up. He changed quickly into dark clothes, grabbed a go-bag he kept prepared for emergencies, a habit from his days in the project, and headed for the private elevator that would take him directly to his secured parking garage. As he drove through the city's nighttime streets in an unmarked sedan, not one of his conspicuous luxury vehicles, Kelvin's mind replayed everything he knew about Subject 7. The teenage girl who'd been brought to the facility with defiant eyes and a broken arm from fighting back against her capture. The subject who'd endured the implantation procedures with minimal sedation because her body processed painkillers too quickly. The young woman who'd looked at him with such betrayal when she'd finally understood what they were turning her into. He'd tried to save her that night 7 years ago. He'd failed, or thought he had. Now he had a second chance. He wasn't going to fail again. Clarissa was zipping up her go-bag when she heard the knock on her apartment door. 3 soft raps, a pause, then 2 more. Not a random visitor. Someone who knew a specific pattern. Her heart hammered as she moved silently to the door, pressing her eye to the peephole. The man standing in her dimly lit hallway wore dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low, but she recognized him immediately. Kelvin Matthews. Clarissa's first instinct was to not answer, to pretend she wasn't home, to wait until he left and then disappear as she'd planned. But something in his posture, tense, alert, concerned, made her hesitate. She opened the door but left the security chain engaged. Dr. Matthews. This isn't a good idea. I got your message, Kelvin said quietly, his dark eyes intense even in the poor lighting. We need to talk. Now. There's nothing to talk about. I warned you. You've been warned. End of story. I'm leaving town tonight. Running won't help, Kelvin said. Not this time. Whatever's happening, whoever's coming, we need to face it together. Together? Clarissa laughed bitterly. We were never together, Dr. Matthews. You were the researcher. I was the lab rat. That's not exactly the foundation for a partnership. Pain flashed across Kelvin's face. I know what I did to you. I know I can never make up for it. But Clarissa, I also tried to save you. I burned down that facility trying to save all of you. I've spent 7 years trying to make amends. Please, let me help you now. Clarissa studied his face through the narrow gap allowed by the security chain. She'd spent 5 years learning to read people, to detect lies, to spot threats. What she saw in Kelvin's expression wasn't deception or manipulation. It was genuine remorse mixed with determination. Against her better judgment, she unhooked the security chain and opened the door wider. You have 5 minutes. Kelvin entered quickly, his eyes immediately scanning the small apartment with the trained assessment of someone expecting threats. He noted the packed bag by the couch, the open laptop with travel booking sites pulled up, the bare wall suggesting a life ready to be abandoned at a moment's notice. You've been preparing to run for a while, he observed. I'm always prepared to run, Clarissa said, closing and locking the door behind him. It's kept me alive this long. Kelvin turned to face her fully, and in the better lighting of her apartment, Clarissa saw the toll the day had taken on him. His usual polish was gone. He looked tired, worried, almost as haunted as she felt. I spoke with Victoria Chen, Kelvin said. She told me you were. A genetic experiment before I was ever recruited into Project Chimera. Clarissa finished. Yeah. I know. I've known for 3 years. Took me a while to dig up the truth, but I eventually found records of what my biological parents did to me. Kelvin's eyes widened. You knew. All this time, you knew. Surprise, Clarissa said flatly. Turns out I'm not just a survivor of one unethical medical program. I'm the product of 2. My parents started modifying my genetics in utero. By the time I was 5, they'd performed 4 separate gene therapy procedures on me. When I was 7, they began testing neural enhancement compounds. When I was 9, the government found out and executed them for crimes against humanity. The words came out mechanical, emotionless, like she was reciting someone else's history. Because, in a way, she was. The child those things had happened to felt like a different person, someone Clarissa had buried so deep she could pretend she'd never existed. I'm sorry, Kelvin said, and the genuine grief in his voice made something crack in Clarissa's carefully maintained composure. I'm so sorry. If I'd known. You would have done exactly what you did anyway, Clarissa interrupted. Because you were following orders. Because you believed in the research. Because you thought you were serving some greater good. We all tell ourselves stories to justify the terrible things we do, Dr. Matthews. Kelvin, he said. Please. Just Kelvin. Clarissa shook her head. Calling you Kelvin makes this personal. I need it to stay professional. Clinical. It's easier that way. Nothing about this is easy, Kelvin said, moving closer. Not threatening, but intense. And pretending we are strangers doesn't change what we are to each other. I helped create what you became, and you're the living proof of what I was capable of, good and bad. We are connected, Clarissa, whether we like it or not. Then we are connected by trauma and atrocity, Clarissa shot back. Not exactly the basis for trust. Maybe not, Kelvin agreed. But it is the basis for understanding. I know what you've been through because I was there. I know what you're capable of because I helped unlock it. And right now, with threats coming from multiple directions, that understanding might be the only thing that keeps us both alive. Clarissa wanted to argue, wanted to push him away and maintain the distance that had kept her safe for 5 years. But she was tired, so tired of running, of hiding, of pretending to be someone she wasn't. And looking at Kelvin, seeing the same exhaustion in his eyes, she realized. He understood that weariness in a way no one else could. The phone call I got, Clarissa said finally, deciding to trust him, at least partially. They said there are others interested in you. Others who don't have restraint. What did they mean? I think there's more than one group trying to restart Project Chimera, Kelvin said. Or something like it. The people who originally funded the project, they went underground when I destroyed the facility, but they didn't disappear. And apparently, they're not the only ones interested in human enhancement technology. So what? We are supposed to fight them? Stop them? Clarissa laughed humorlessly. I'm a nursing student, Kelvin. You're a cardiac surgeon. We are not soldiers. We are not heroes. No, Kelvin agreed. We are survivors. And sometimes that's more important. Before Clarissa could respond, a soft beeping sound came from Kelvin's pocket. He pulled out a phone, not a smartphone, but some kind of specialized device, and his face went pale. What is it? Clarissa asked. Perimeter alert, Kelvin said tightly. I have sensors monitoring the entrances to your building. Someone just came in through the basement access. 2 people, moving tactically, avoiding security cameras. Fear spiked through Clarissa's system, and with it came the familiar sensation of her implants activating, a warm, tingling feeling spreading from her core through her limbs. Her senses sharpened, her reaction time accelerated, her muscles primed for action. This was the part of her enhancement she'd never been able to suppress completely, the combat reflexes that kicked in automatically when she perceived threats. How long do we have? She asked, her voice suddenly calm, focused. 3 minutes, maybe 4, Kelvin said, pocketing the device. They'll need to bypass your apartment lock, which will buy us a little time. Not enough time to run, Clarissa assessed. And the fire escape is visible from the street. If they have support outside, they'll see us. Then we don't run, Kelvin said, and there was steel in his voice that reminded Clarissa he'd been part of Project Chimera too, not as a subject, but he'd been trained in security protocols, had worked in a facility that expected armed resistance. We prepare. Clarissa didn't waste time arguing. She moved quickly around her small apartment, grabbing items that could serve as weapons or defensive tools. A heavy flashlight, kitchen knife, pepper spray, a metal baseball bat she kept by the door. Not much, but better than nothing. Kelvin was doing something with his phone, his fingers moving rapidly across the screen.
I'm contacting Victoria.
She can have backup here in 10 minutes. We don't have 10 minutes, Clarissa said, positioning herself behind the couch where she'd have cover and a clear line to both the door and the window. Then we hold out for 8, Kelvin replied, moving to stand beside her. Clarissa, your implants, can you use them? She hesitated. They're not like they used to be. I removed most of the control hardware. What's left is mostly passive, enhanced sensors, faster reactions, better pain tolerance. Nothing offensive. That's still more than I have, Kelvin said. So if it comes to a fight. It won't, a woman's voice called from outside the apartment door. Not if you're smart about this. Both Clarissa and Kelvin froze. The voice was familiar, not the mechanically distorted voice from the phone call, but a real human voice. Female, young, and impossible. Subject 4. Clarissa breathed. It's been a long time, 7, the voice replied. I'm coming in. Don't shoot. Or stab. Or whatever you're planning to do with that baseball but you're definitely holding. The door's lock clicked, not picked, but deactivated by some kind of electronic override. The door swung open slowly, revealing a petite Asian woman in tactical gear, her hands raised in a gesture of non-aggression. Behind her stood a tall, muscular man with Scandinavian features, also armed but not pointing his weapons at them. Clarissa's breath caught. She recognized both of them from the project, Subject 4 and Subject 9. Survivors she'd thought were either dead or lost to the years of separation. May. Clarissa whispered. Soren. Hey, Rumi, my, Subject 4, said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes.
Surprise.
We are not dead. Also, we need to talk about the really bad people who are about 30 seconds behind us. Kelvin's hand moved instinctively to his phone, ready to call for help or activate some emergency protocol, but Clarissa grabbed his wrist. Wait, she said softly. If they wanted to hurt us, we'd already be dead. My, Subject 4, stepped fully into the apartment, followed by Soren, Subject 9. The tall Scandinavian man closed and locked the door behind them, then did something with a small electronic device that made Kelvin's perimeter alarm app display a signal-blocked error. Sorry about the dramatic entrance, Mai said, lowering her hands. But we've been tracking you, 7, and when we saw Dr. Matthews show up, we knew shit was about to get real. Then we picked up another team moving on this location, and we figured you probably shouldn't handle that alone. Another team. Kelvin demanded. Who? That's the question, isn't it? Soren said, his voice deep and accented. We've identified 3 separate groups with active interest in Project Chimera survivors. Military intelligence from 2 different countries, a private military contractor with biotech interests, and, he glanced at Mai, someone we haven't been able to identify yet. The ghost organization, Mai added. They're the scary ones. They move like professionals, but they don't match any known intelligence agency patterns. And they seem to know more about the project than they should. Clarissa's mind reeled. 2 of her fellow subjects were standing in her apartment, alive and apparently working together to track threats related to the project. Everything she'd believed about being alone, about being the only survivor trying to build a normal life, was collapsing. How long have you 2 been working together? She asked. Since about 6 months after the fire, Mai said. We both ended up in Seattle, both trying to disappear. Eventually crossed paths and realized we were stronger together than apart. We've been trying to track down the other survivors ever since. Why? Kelvin asked, his tone sharp with suspicion. Why track them down instead of letting them disappear? Soren's expression hardened. Because disappearing doesn't work, Doctor. Not when you carry experimental technology in your body that multiple governments want to dissect and reverse engineer. The only way to stay safe is to know who's hunting you and neutralize threats before they materialize. Neutralize, Clarissa repeated slowly. You mean kill. Mai and Soren exchanged a glance but didn't deny it. We've done what we had to do to survive, Mai said. Just like you, 7. Don't pretend you've kept your hands completely clean these past 5 years. The accusation hit too close to home. Clarissa thought about the 3 men who tried to capture her in Portland 2 years ago, men she'd left bleeding in an alley. She thought about the woman in San Francisco who'd been asking too many questions about her past, a woman who'd mysteriously disappeared before she could report her findings. Clarissa had told herself those were defensive actions, necessary violence. But the line between defense and offense had always been blurry. What do you want from us? Kelvin asked, moving slightly in front of Clarissa in a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed. Right now. We want to not get killed by the team that's about to breach this building, Mai said. Long term. We want to destroy what's left of Project Chimera before it destroys more lives. And we think you two can help. I destroyed the project 7 years ago, Kelvin said firmly. You destroyed one facility, Soren corrected. One set of records. But the technology wasn't invented in a vacuum, Doctor. There were research papers, theoretical frameworks, proof-of-concept demonstrations, all documented and distributed across multiple institutions before the project ever became Project Chimera. You killed the tree, but the roots are still alive. Kelvin's face went pale. The preliminary research was peer-reviewed, published in legitimate journals under cover identities.
Idé forgotten.
Convenient amnesia, Mai said dryly. Must be nice. Meanwhile, we've spent 7 years tracking down every reference, every citation, every researcher who might have access to enough information to restart the program. It's exhausting work. And unsuccessful, apparently, Clarissa added, since multiple groups are still hunting us. We've eliminated most of the threats, Soren said. The groups currently active are the ones with the most resources, the deepest connections, the best protection. They're the final bosses, so to speak. And they're not going to be eliminated easily. A sound from the hallway, soft, but distinct. The quiet scuff of tactical boots on worn carpet. Everyone in the apartment tensed. Mai and Soren moved with practiced efficiency, taking positions that covered both the door and the window. Clarissa felt her implants surge to full activity, flooding her system with combat-ready neurochemicals. Even Kelvin, despite his lack of enhancement, positioned himself tactically, 7 years removed from the project, but muscle memory persisting. How many? Mai whispered to Soren, who was listening to something through an earpiece. 4 in the hallway. 2 covering the back exit. 1 in a vehicle outside providing overwatch. 8 total. Professional team, Mai assessed. Military training. Well equipped. Can we fight through them? Clarissa asked, hating how naturally the question came. We could try, Soren said. But not without casualties. And not without drawing police attention we definitely don't want. So we negotiate. Kelvin suggested. Mai left. These people don't negotiate, Doctor. They extract. A voice called from the hallway. Male, American accent, trained vocal projection. Dr. Matthews. Ms. Chen. We know you're inside. We also know you have friends with you. Subject 4 and Subject 9, correct? This is a rare opportunity. 4 high-value targets in one location. C.
Mai muttered. No negotiations.
The voice continued. We are not here to harm you. We represent parties interested in the continuation of important research. Research that was prematurely terminated. We'd like to discuss reinstatement of funding under much more favorable terms. Terms that would include significant financial compensation and full control over research directions. Kelvin's jaw clenched. They want me to restart the project. To willingly create more subjects. And they want us as proof of concept, Clarissa realized. Show potential investors what the finished product looks like. Not happening, Soren growled, checking his weapon. The voice from the hallway took on a harder edge. Dr. Matthews, you have 30 seconds to open this door voluntarily. After that, we'll open it ourselves. And we'll be significantly less gentle about collecting you. Kelvin looked at Clarissa, then at Mai and Soren. 4 people, 3 of them enhanced survivors of an illegal medical program, one of them the guilty researcher who'd helped create them. Not exactly a team built on trust and camaraderie. But right now, they needed each other. Is there another way out? Kelvin asked Clarissa quietly. Fire escaped to the alley, but they're covering it, she said. What about the roof? Mai asked. Access through a maintenance door 2 floors up, Clarissa said. But would have to get past these guys first. Soren was studying something on a handheld device. The building's utility layout shows a service shaft that runs from the basement to the roof. It's not designed for human passage, but we are not exactly normal humans anymore, I finished. We could fit. Where's the shaft access? Kelvin asked. Clarissa pointed to a narrow closet in her apartment's corner. There's a vent there. Opens to the shaft. I checked when I moved in. Always plan your escape routes. Smart girl, I approved. Soren and I can hold them off while you two get into the shaft. No, Clarissa said firmly. We all go or none of us go. 20 seconds, the voice from the hallway announced. New plan, Soren said quickly. I'll create a distraction at the front door. While they're focused on me, the rest of you get into the shaft. I'll follow once you're clear. That's suicide, Kelvin protested. Soren smiled grimly. Not for someone with my enhancements. Subject 9 was designed for exactly this kind of situation. High-stress combat, overwhelming odds, rapid adaptation. Trust me, Doctor. This is what I was made for. The words hung in the air, a stark reminder of what Project Chimera had done to these people. They hadn't just been enhanced, they'd been designed with specific combat roles in mind. Subject 9 had been the close-quarters combat specialist. Subject 4 had been reconnaissance and infiltration. Subject 7, Clarissa, had been the long-term deep cover operative, designed to blend in, to wait, to strike when least expected. 10 seconds, the voice called. Go, Soren ordered, already moving toward the door. I grabbed Kelvin's arm, pulling him toward the closet. Clarissa hesitated, hating the idea of leaving Soren to face 8 trained operatives alone, but Mai's grip was insistent. He'll be fine, Mai hissed. He's survived worse. Move. Clarissa yanked open the closet door and pulled at the vent cover. It came away easily. She'd loosened the screws years ago, part of her obsessive escape planning. Behind it, a dark shaft descended into shadows and rose toward faint light from above. Up, she said. Always go up. They'll expect us to go down. Kelvin stared at the narrow shaft doubtfully. I'm not enhanced. I can't climb like you can. Then we'll help you, Mai said, already pulling herself into the shaft with the ease of someone who'd spent years training for exactly this kind of movement. The sound of the apartment door being breached echoed behind them, not kicked in, but opened with some kind of electronic or mechanical override. Soren's voice boomed, looking for someone. Then chaos erupted. Gunfire, suppressed but still unmistakable. Shouts. The heavy thud of bodies hitting walls. The sharp crack of breaking bones. Now. Clarissa pushed Kelvin toward the shaft. He grabbed the edges and pulled himself in with surprising athleticism for a surgeon. Clarissa followed, her enhanced strength making the climb effortless even as she reached down to help pull Kelvin upward. They climbed in darkness, the sounds of fighting fading below them. Up 1 floor. 2 floors. 3. Clarissa's arms burned with the effort of essentially carrying Kelvin's weight while climbing, but her enhanced physiology pushed through the pain. Above them, Mai had reached the roof access and was working on the lock. Below them, ominously, the fighting had stopped. Soren. Mai called softly into a throat MIC status. Static. Then, clear, for now. Multiple hostiles down. But reinforcements. Incoming. Get to the roof. I'll catch up. His voice was labored, pained. He was hurt, possibly badly. We need to go back for him, Clarissa said. We need to get the doctor to safety, Mai countered. That's the priority. Soren knows what he's doing. The roof access gave way with a metallic groan. Mai pulled herself through, then reached down to help Kelvin up. Clarissa followed, emerging onto the apartment building's flat roof just as the city's ambient light pollution revealed figures moving on adjacent rooftops. They've got eyes everywhere, Mai observed grimly. This is a coordinated operation. Then how do we get out? Kelvin asked, breathing hard from the climb. Clarissa was already scanning their options. The building was 5 stories tall, surrounded by structures of varying heights. 2 blocks away, She could see the green space of a public park. In the distance, the elevated highway hummed with late-night traffic. "We jump," she said. Both Kelvin and Mai turned to stare at her. "Jump where?" Kelvin asked. Clarissa pointed to the next building, 4 stories tall, about 15 feet away. "There. Then we keep jumping, building to building, until we are out of their perimeter." "That's insane," Kelvin said flatly. "I can't make that jump." "You can if I'm carrying you," Clarissa said. Subject 7 was optimized for strength and endurance, remember? I can make that jump with your weight added. "Even if you could, they'll see us," Mai pointed out. "Let them see," Clarissa said. "We are not trying to hide anymore. We are trying to survive. Big difference." The roof access door behind them shuddered. Someone was trying to force it open from below. "Decision time," Mai said, checking her weapon's ammunition count. Kelvin looked at Clarissa, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't expected: trust. He was terrified, clearly, but he was trusting her enhanced capabilities, trusting her judgment, trusting the very modifications he'd helped install in her body 7 years ago. "Do it," he said. Clarissa didn't hesitate. She grabbed Kelvin around the waist, positioning him in a fireman's carry that distributed his weight across her shoulders and core. Her implants surged, flooding her muscles with strength-enhancing signals that made his weight feel manageable. "Mai, you first," Clarissa said. "Clear the landing zone." Mai nodded and sprinted across the roof, her enhanced speed making her a blur in the dim light. She hit the edge and launched herself across the gap, landing in a perfect roll on the adjacent building's roof. The access door burst open. Armed figures poured onto the roof. "Stop!" one of them shouted. "There's nowhere to run." Clarissa ran. With Kelvin's weight on her shoulders, her implants pushed to their limits, she sprinted toward the edge of the roof. The gap yawned before her, 15 feet of empty air, 4 floors above the concrete street. If she missed, if her strength gave out, if her calculations were wrong, they would both die. She didn't miss. Clarissa's enhanced legs propelled them across the gap with feet to spare. She landed hard, her knees absorbing the impact in ways that would have shattered normal joints. Kelvin grunted but stayed silent. He understood that any distraction now could be fatal. Behind them, the pursuit continued. Some of their pursuers attempted the same jump. Most made it. One didn't. Clarissa heard the scream and the terrible impact and forced herself not to think about it. "Next building." Mai called, already at the far edge of their current roof. They ran and jumped again. And again. Building to building, roof to roof, a desperate chase across the city's elevated landscape. Kelvin's weight grew heavier with each jump, her implants protesting the sustained exertion, but Clarissa pushed through. On the 4th jump, her landing went wrong. She came down at an angle, her ankle twisted, and both she and Kelvin tumbled across the rough rooftop surface. Kelvin rolled free, gasping, while Clarissa forced herself to her feet despite the shooting pain in her ankle. "I'm fine," she said before Kelvin could ask. "Keep moving." But the pursuit was closing in. They'd made it 4 buildings away from Clarissa's apartment, but they couldn't keep this up forever. Eventually, her enhancements would fail. Eventually, they'd make a mistake. Then a helicopter roared overhead, not military, but a civilian medical helicopter bearing the Matthews Memorial Hospital logo. "Did you call for backup?" Mai asked Kelvin. "No," he said, equally confused. The helicopter descended toward their rooftop, its downwash creating a windstorm of debris and dust. As it touched down, the side door slid open, revealing Victoria Chen behind a mounted rifle. "Get in," she shouted. "Now." Clarissa didn't question the miraculous rescue. She grabbed Kelvin and practically threw him toward the helicopter, then helped Mai climb aboard. As she pulled herself in last, she looked back at the buildings they'd crossed and saw their pursuers gathered on various rooftops, weapons raised but not firing, apparently unwilling to shoot down a civilian medical helicopter over a populated city. The helicopter lifted off, banking hard to the left as Victoria secured the side door. "Everyone intact?" Victoria asked clinically. "More or less," Mai said. "But Soren's still back there." Soren's fine, Victoria said, showing them a tablet display showing a moving blue dot on a city map. He activated his emergency beacon. I've got another team picking him up. You have teams? Clarissa asked incredulously. Who are you, exactly?
Victoria smiled grimly.
Someone who's been cleaning up Project Chimera's mess for 7 years. And someone who's very tired of cleaning up alone. So congratulations, all of you. You're officially recruited. Recruited for what? Kelvin demanded. For the same thing Mai and Soren have been doing, Victoria said. Finding and neutralizing the remnants of the project before they can harm anyone else. Tonight proved we are past the point of hiding. So now we fight back. Properly. As a team. Clarissa looked at Kelvin, seeing her own mix of fear and determination reflected in his eyes. Neither of them had wanted this. Both of them had tried to escape, to build normal lives from the wreckage of their shared past. But normal wasn't an option anymore. Maybe it never had been. What's the plan? Clarissa asked Victoria. First, we get somewhere safe. Then we talk about everything, and I mean everything. You two know about Project Chimera's origins, funding sources, and remaining resources. After that, Victoria checked her rifle's magazine with practiced efficiency. We go hunting. The helicopter flew them to a location Clarissa couldn't identify. Somewhere outside the city limits, a sprawling estate hidden behind tall walls and sophisticated security systems. As they landed on a private helipad, Clarissa saw at least a dozen people moving around the grounds, all carrying themselves with military bearing. This is your base of operations? Kelvin asked Victoria as they disembarked. One of 3, Victoria replied. We rotate locations every 2 weeks. Paranoia keeps you alive in this business. They were led into a large house that had been converted into something between a military command center and a research facility. Screens displayed real-time surveillance feeds from multiple cities. Servers hummed in climate-controlled rooms. The walls were covered with photos, documents, and red string connecting various elements. A literal conspiracy board. Welcome to the resistance, Mai said dryly. Soren was already there, sitting on a medical examination table while a field medic stitched a gash on his shoulder. He looked up as they entered and grinned. Told you I'd be fine, he said to Mai. You got shot, Mai countered. Just a graze, Soren dismissed. I've had worse. Victoria gestured for everyone to gather around a large conference table in the center of the main room. Once they were all seated, she pulled up a holographic display that showed a complex network of connections. Let me explain what we are dealing with, Victoria began. 7 years ago, Project Chimera officially ended when Dr. Matthews, then Dr. Zhong, destroyed the primary research facility and scattered the evidence. What we've learned since is that the project wasn't isolated. It was one branch of a larger operation. The display zoomed in on various nodes. The project had 3 primary funding sources: the Department of Defense through black budget allocations, a private pharmaceutical consortium called Helix Industries, and an organization we've tentatively identified as the Board, a group of wealthy individuals interested in human enhancement for personal reasons. When the facility burned down, Victoria continued, the DOD wrote off their losses and buried the program. Helix Industries restructured and rebranded. But the Board, they went underground and started rebuilding. Kelvin leaned forward, his face grave. How many subjects have they created since? None that we know of, Victoria said. They've been trying, but without the original research data and without subjects like Clarissa who were genetically predisposed to accept the enhancements, they failed. That's why they want you both so badly. Kelvin, you have the knowledge. Clarissa, you're the proof that it works. Clarissa felt Kelvin's eyes on her and turned to meet his gaze. In that moment, she saw the full weight of his guilt, 7 years of trying to atone, only to discover that his sins were still bearing poisonous fruit. So we end it, Clarissa said firmly. We find the Board. We destroy their research capabilities. We make sure no one else goes through what we went through. Easier said than done, Soren interjected. wincing as the medic tied off his stitches. The board operates through shell companies and proxies. We've been hunting them for 2 years and haven't gotten close to the actual leadership. That's because you didn't have me, Kelvin said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. I may have destroyed the facility, but I kept insurance, encrypted files hidden in multiple locations. Names, financial records, communications. Everything I could gather before I burned it down. I've been too afraid to use it, afraid that accessing those files would reveal my location. But now... He looked at each of them in turn. Now I don't care about hiding anymore. Victoria's eyes gleamed. You can identify the board's leadership. I can do better than that, Kelvin said. I can tell you where they're most vulnerable. I know which members were personally involved in the experiments. I know who has the most to lose if the truth comes out. We don't need to destroy the entire organization. We just need to cut off the head. Over the next 3 hours, Kelvin accessed his hidden files and revealed everything he'd kept secret for 7 years. Names appeared on the holographic display. Politicians, business magnates, even a Supreme Court justice. The scope of the board's influence was staggering. We can't fight them all directly, Mai observed. We don't have to, Clarissa said, an idea forming. We expose them. Publicize everything. Make the cost of continuing the project higher than any potential benefit. Whistleblowing failed with other black projects, Soren pointed out. Because the whistleblowers didn't have proof, Clarissa countered. We are the proof. The 4 of us, 5 with Victoria, we can testify to what was done. Show the scars. Demonstrate the enhancements. Make it impossible to deny or dismiss. Kelvin was shaking his head. You'd be giving up any chance at normal lives. The moment you go public, you'll be famous or infamous. There's no going back from that. Clarissa laughed bitterly. I gave up normal the moment my parents started experimenting on me in the womb. I've been running from cameras and questions my entire life. Maybe it's time I ran toward them instead. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the pre-dawn sky. Behind her, she could hear the others debating logistics, discussing safe channels for releasing information, arguing about timing and strategy. But Clarissa's mind was elsewhere. She thought about the girl she'd been, Subject 7, a number instead of a name, a weapon instead of a person. She thought about the 5 years she'd spent trying to be normal, trying to disappear into the background of ordinary life. She thought about the nursing school acceptance letter in her pocket, representing a future that now seemed impossibly naive. A hand touched her shoulder gently. Kelvin stood beside her, his reflection visible in the window glass. I'm sorry, he said softly. For all of it. For the procedures, the pain, the loss of your childhood. For creating something inside you that you can never fully escape. I've spent 7 years trying to make amends, but I know it will never be enough. Clarissa turned to face him. In the growing light, she could see the genuine remorse etched into his features, the weight of guilt he'd carried alone for so long. You tried to save us, she said. That night, when you burned down the facility, you tried to get everyone out. I remember. I was conscious when you carried me toward the exit. The smoke was so thick, and you kept saying I'm sorry, over and over. You didn't make it to me in time, but you tried. That has to count for something. I thought you died in that fire, Kelvin said, his voice breaking slightly. I've lived with that guilt every single day. Maybe that's why you became Dr. Matthews, Clarissa said. Not just to hide, but to save lives because you couldn't save ours. That's not nothing, Kelvin. You've helped thousands of people. But I hurt 12 first, he whispered. And 4 of us survived, Clarissa countered. And now we have a chance to make sure no one else gets hurt. That's redemption, isn't it? Not erasing the past, but using it to build a better future. Kelvin looked at her with something like wonder. How did you get so wise? Trauma, Clarissa said dryly. It ages you fast. Victoria called them back to the table. We have a plan. It's risky and there's no guarantee it works, but it's our best shot. The plan was elegant in its simplicity: simultaneous release of evidence across multiple platforms, coupled with live press conferences where Clarissa, Mai, and Soren would demonstrate their enhancements while Kelvin provided technical testimony. Victoria had contacts in major news organizations who would guarantee coverage. The files Kelvin had preserved would be released through WikiLeaks and other secure channels to ensure they couldn't be suppressed. "We go public in 72 hours, Victoria concluded. "That gives us time to prepare statements, brief lawyers, and set up protective measures. After that, the world knows everything." "And the board?" Mai asked. "They'll scramble to do damage control," Victoria said. "But with their leadership exposed and their operations public knowledge, they'll be too busy defending themselves to come after us. At least, that's the theory." "What about the others?" Clarissa asked. "The other subjects who survived and stayed hidden?" "We'll offer them protection if they want it," Victoria said. "But we won't force anyone into the spotlight. This is voluntary." Clarissa looked around the table at her unlikely allies: a guilt-ridden researcher, a spy master with a conscience, and two fellow survivors who'd chosen to fight rather than hide. They were broken people trying to fix a broken system. It wasn't much, but it was something. "I'm in," Clarissa said. "As am I," Kelvin added. Mai and Soren nodded their agreement. The press conference had worked better than any of them had dared hope. The evidence was too substantial to ignore, the testimony too compelling to dismiss. Within days, congressional investigations were launched. Within weeks, key members of the board were arrested. Helix Industries stock crashed, and several executives faced criminal charges. Clarissa stood in the lobby of Matthews Memorial Hospital, now wearing nursing scrubs with her own name badge. The nursing program had not only accepted her after the revelations but had fast-tracked her admission, recognizing that her unique perspective would make her an exceptional caregiver. The world knew who she was now, knew what had been done to her, what she could do, what she represented. But instead of hiding from that knowledge, Clarissa had chosen to use it. She gave speeches at medical schools about research ethics. She testified before Congress about the need for stronger protections for vulnerable populations. She lived openly as both a survivor and a symbol of hope. Kelvin approached from the elevators, still in his surgical scrubs from a morning procedure. He smiled when he saw her. "Ready for your first clinical rotation?" he asked. "Terrified," Clarissa admitted. "What if I hurt someone? What if I used too much strength and—" "You'll be fine," Kelvin interrupted gently. "You've spent 5 years learning to control your enhancements. You're not going to accidentally hurt a patient." "You seem very confident about that." "I am," Kelvin said, "because I helped design those enhancements. I know exactly what you're capable of, including the capacity for extraordinary gentleness when it matters." They walked together through the hospital corridor, doctor and student, researcher and subject, two people bound by a traumatic past but choosing to build a better future. Around them, staff members and patients went about their business, some staring, most politely pretending not to notice the celebrities in their midst. "Do you ever regret it?" Clarissa asked. "Going public? You could have stayed hidden behind your billionaire persona." "Every day," Kelvin admitted. "And then I remember what hiding cost me: 7 years of guilt, paranoia, and isolation. This is better. Harder, but better." They reached the nursing station where Clarissa would begin her rotation. Before she could enter, Kelvin touched her arm. "Clarissa, I want you to know something. What we did, exposing the project, fighting back, that was incredibly brave. But choosing to become a nurse after everything you've been through? That's even braver. You could have used your abilities for anything. And you chose healing." Clarissa felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. "Someone once told me that redemption isn't erasing the past, it's using it to build a better future. I figured I should take my own advice." Kelvin smiled. Wise words. Wonder who said them. "Just some trauma survivor," Clarissa said with a slight grin. "You wouldn't know her." As she entered the nursing station to begin her first day of clinical work, Clarissa felt something she hadn't experienced in years: genuine hope. The scars on her abdomen would always be there, physical reminders of what had been done to her. The implants would always hum faintly in her core, permanent evidence of her enhanced nature. But she was more than her scars, more than her enhancements, more than Subject 7. She was Clarissa Chen, survivor, student, advocate, and finally, after so many years of running and hiding, simply herself. The journey from that examination room where Kelvin had first recognized her to this moment had been harrowing. But standing here now, about to begin her career as a healer, Clarissa realized that sometimes the most unexpected encounters lead to the most necessary transformations. Dr. Kelvin Matthews and Clarissa Chen had both been shocked by what that examination revealed, but not in the way either of them expected. They'd discovered not just shared trauma, but shared purpose. Not just guilt and survival, but the possibility of redemption. And that, Clarissa thought as she tied on her surgical mask and prepared to meet her first patient, was worth every scar. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe, like and comments.